Hello and welcome to the fourth video in this series for beginners learning to program Python. In this video we're going to take a look at comparisons and something known as testing for truth. Going to the Python documentation, we've got truth value testing. So we've got two Boolean types in Python, one called true and one called false. And inside the documentation there's a pretty concise definition as to what is true and what is false. And basically it says a Boolean result, so a true or a false, will always return 0 or false for false and 1 or true for true unless otherwise stated. In other words, non-zeros are true. There are most of the definitions of what can be considered false here. So a none type, which we'll come to later in the course, or false itself, and then any numeric values that are 0, and then lists, anything empty, anything that is 0 in terms of an object or something would also be considered false. And this is something that's important to know when making comparisons and expressions. The next part, the and or not, we're going to come to in later videos when we start doing decisions. So we start doing ifs analysis and things like this. What I want to do in this video is have a quick look over the comparisons because they're really important, and without these we can't really do much of them. In documentation there's a good overview here. We have the less than equal to, the greater than equal to. We have a double equals here as equals, and if you're new to the programming world this will be a bit of a surprise, but if you remember when we assign a variable we use a single equals. To compare two values together we use the equals. Then an exclamation mark followed by an equal is whether things are not equal to each other. And then we have is and is not. And is can be a little bit dangerous to use, and is one of the things I want to focus on towards the end of this video. So the good news is then for this video we're not going to write any script, we're actually just going to go straight into the Python interpreter and stay in there and do a few short examples. I'm going to do the most basic one of all and ask the question using a comparator less than, is 3 less than 4? And I get true. If I ask this, if 3 is greater than 4, I get false. And these are the two Boolean true and falses that I was on about earlier. I can also ask if 3 is equal to 4 and I'll get false. If I ask if 3 is equal to 3, then I'll get true. And what it's comparing here is the value. When we get to is, we're going to say some tricky things with this, but at the moment it's comparing the value. Let me make a new string called string1 and give that 3, and let me make string2 and make that also 3. And now if I ask the question string1 is equal to string2, I get true. If I ask if they're not equal to each other, then I get false. I can redefine string2, let's say, as the string 4, and ask the same question, are they not equal to each other? And now I get true because string2 is now 4 and string1 is 3, the string 3. What about if I ask if say I set a variable num1 equal to 3, and now I ask num1, which is 3, if it's equal to string1, which remember is also 3 but the string, I get false. The values aren't the same. What if I ask string1 is equal to num1? I also get false. The values here aren't the same. What if I ask that string1 is greater than equal to num1? And now I get something called a type error, and it says to me that the greater than equal to operator is not supported between instances of string and int. And what that means is that in Python there is no support to make a comparison between a string and an integer using the greater than or equals. The equals one worked okay and quite rightly gave us false, but the greater than equal to is not available, and therefore we get something called a type error. We'll deal with errors also later on in a couple of videos time. If I do something however like int and then string1, so I cast it, so we'll just check that's a 3. So if I do int string1 is equal to num1, which is also 3, then I get true. String1 has been cast to an int, and now we can evaluate whether the value is the same as the value of the variable number 1, and it is. You can also chain operators together, but be very, very careful with this. If I make one that's called 3 greater than 4 and equal to false, you might think here that it'll give us true because 3 is not greater than 4, so it's false, and that's equal to false. But what we actually get here is false. The first thing that's being evaluated is the 3 is greater than 4, which already gives us a false, and then 4 equals false is not evaluated at all. To make that actually get as maybe we would like, I would have to say in brackets here 3 is greater than 4, and then is equal to false, and now I get true. So when you're using more than one operator, you have to be careful that you put the brackets in and bear in mind that the order that operators are going to be applied. In Python, it's basically from left to right. They'll be evaluated. There are some precedence issues which we'll come across in later videos, but be careful when you're combining multiple operators. Where it can get a little bit tricky is the is, and I'm just going back to the is, and here we see that what it's looking for is something called object identity. And why is that tricky? Well, let's find an example here. Let's say I have my string 1 again, and I'm going to declare my string 1 to be 3 again. So if I put to the output string 1, I get 3. Now imagine I want to ask the question, I'll take string 2 and make that also 3. And I want to ask if string 1 is string 2. And I get true. That's very nice. Now I'm going to ask string 1 casting a string of 3. So I've got the integer 3 and I get false. And just to reiterate what I've done there, if I just do string 3, you can see I've also got a string of 3. But if I ask the question string 1 is string of 3, I get false. And you might expect that actually to be true. Let's try things the other way around. I'll make num1 is 3, string 1 is equal to 3, and now I'm going to ask num1 is, and then int of string 1. And here I get true. So what's going on here then? In one line I've cast something one way and it's told me that the is comes to true. In the other I've cast the other way and it's come to false. And there's some other examples I can use here as well. I'm going to do fl1 for float1 is equal to 1.0 and fl2 is equal to 1.0, and then I'll do fl1 is fl2 and I get false. So what's going on? Well, the answer lies in the way Python declares variables and reserves memory space for its variables. Depending on the type, sometimes on what's going on in the Python runtime, it'll reuse, if it can, memory that's already been declared in some cases and not in all. And this is why it's important to realize that is looking at object identity. So looking at these two floats here, why has that come out false? Well, we can use a built-in function called id, and this tells us the ID of the object. Now if I look at the ID of fl1, it's a long number. If I look at the ID of fl2, we can see that the IDs are different. They're different objects, they're at different places in the memory. If I now instead make string 1 is equal to 3 and string 2 is equal to 3, just like I did with the floats, and ask the question string 1 is string 2, I get true. So let's have a look at where these both are in the memory. So string 1 is there with that long number, and string 2 is exactly the same place in the memory. When I do this, string 1 is, and then cast, or even just put the 3 like this, and it says true. It's because Python will have declared this 3 string here in the same place. It will have reused the same place where it's already declared in the memory here. When I do string 1 is, and then string and cast a 3 to a string and I get false, it will have declared in the memory this 3 being converted to a string, that then in the memory in a different place. Therefore the object is not the same. And what is checking, it's checking, and is not is the opposite, object identity. So in this case, if I do string 1 is not string 3, I get true, because it's just the opposite way around. The really important thing to know with is, when you're doing these comparators, you're comparing if the identity of the objects is the same. And you might say, well, what use does that have? It looks completely confusing. And in fact, in our case, using these simple types here, it does. But later on, when you start programming, you've actually got bigger objects, so lists, or you're working on an actual dictionary object or something like this. There will be many occasions where you'll want to know whether the object you're working on is the one that you think you should be working on, and the is test is very useful then, so you make sure you know which object you're actually working on and manipulating. Okay then, so I hope that's clear for this video. It's quite short and we're just inside the interpreter, but it's important to get a handle exactly of what these comparisons are doing. In the next video we can get back to writing some kind of script that makes a little program, but allow us now with the comparisons to start making some logical decisions with if and else and things like that, which we're going to follow up shortly in the coming videos. So thanks very much for watching. Comments and questions welcome as always on YouTube, and see you in the next one.